The partners of Solarian Games. I'm Jason.
And I'm Peter.
And this week we have just one news story for you because we have a guest. So our guest this week is Matt Shoemaker, who has a forthcoming book, Gathering of Gamers, and who people in the industry may know just from his work as an archivist and with other documentaries and things like that as well as some of his own game design.
Yeah.
Our only news story we have before we get to Gathering of Gamers is, well, kind of a big one. So it is Diamond Distributors goes out of business. And that means that independent publishers are bound to lose all of their physical stock they have with them. So
yeah, this is bad news, man.
Yeah. Well, we'll go into this, but let me start by just making it really clear who did go out of business and who didn't go out of business, right?
Okay.
It's a little complicated. And I see we have some folks in the chat, so hello everybody. Actually, that's us. Okay, so just for anybody who's listening, if you don't know how distribution works, basically, if you have physical product to sell in stores, you don't sell it directly to the stores because there's just too many to deal with. So you have a distributor that goes in between and they take care of that for you for a small cut. There used to be a few big ones. One of the biggest ones was Alliance. They got bought out by Diamond maybe 20 years ago or 10 years ago in the past. Then we heard that Diamond was going bankrupt and they were selling off Alliance. So they're not part of them anymore. But after the bankrupt doesn't mean out of business. It just means reorganizing. But now, no, actually really going out of business. So what we have here is Diamond, which is one of the biggest distributors of comics and games. And they've got everybody's stuff and they're going away.
Yeah.
So so basically in a nutshell, here's what happened. Distributors don't pay up front for the stuff they get. They're basically taking it on consignment. But it's a weird legal situation that I can't understand or explain that well. So if you send I've been dealing with distributors pretty much all my life because I started out doing music magazines in my teen years, and I've dealt with distributors the whole time. When things are going well, they're going great, right? You send them 1,000 or 10,000 copies of your stuff or whatever it is that they're willing to take. They turn around and they sell it to the stores, and they come back to you and they tell you, here's how many we sold. So let's say you send them 1,000 books, and that book is going to sell in the store for $50. If things go right, you, the creator of this, gets about 35 to 40% of the cover price. And then the store gets about 45 to 50% of the cover price, and the distributor gets that little slice that's in the middle. But usually when you sell 1,000 books to them, you don't actually get the money for 1,000 books, because what will happen is not all of them are going to sell. And so the stores, they go back and they send them back to the distributors and they say, we only sold, 80% or something. Or in the case when I used to do magazines, the sell-through rate would be tiny. They would only sell like a quarter of the ones. And then you have to decide as a publisher, do you want to get those books back? Are you going to pay the shipping? Because you have to pay the shipping to get them back so that you can
Well, you got to pay the shipping both ways, don't you? Like to them and back. Yeah.
Yeah. You get screwed both ways.
Well, somebody's got to pay for it.
Do you want to pay the shipping to get these back? And if you do, great, you have them back. You can sell them some other way if you can find a way. If you don't, then you can do one of two things. You can either do what's called cover returns or affidavit returns. Cover returns means they rip the covers off the front and they send you back just the covers to prove that they're not going to sell them anymore. So it's cheaper shipping. And you have nothing to sell. And so that, by the way, if you ever go into a thrift shop or a used bookstore and you see a book with no cover on the front, that's illegal. They're selling a book that was supposed to legally have been thrown out. They're ripping you off. Maybe not the bookstore, but someone along the line did it.
Right.
Or you do affidavit returns, which is they just say, we pinky swear promise that we didn't sell these books and we've destroyed them, so we're not going to give you any money for them. I don't like that one because I don't trust distributors, right? Because I know when I've done this in the past that when we have sold magazines or whatever to distributors on the affidavit model, mysteriously the unsold goes up by 20%. You know, I'm just saying, I don't think distributors are the most trustworthy bunch out there as a class of people generally.
Right.
So that's to kind of set the stage here. So theoretically, then you get paid after you find out how many sold and everything goes well. But the weird thing is, you would think that if you are selling things on consignment, those things still belong to you, right? Like if I put a used denim jacket in a consignment store down on Main Street and they don't sell it, I go get it back. It's
right.
mine.
You should be able to. Like you would think, even though they have this model where you can pay them to ship it back to you, that should be a thing, right? You should say, all right, well, it's like, if you're going out of business, fine, I'll pay you, send my stuff back.
Yeah. So theoretically, it's still yours. But here's where it gets sketchy. I don't know the legal ins and outs of it, but just because it feels like consignment doesn't mean it is consignment. From some legal perspective, somehow Diamond had it in the contracts that when you send the stuff to them, it's theirs. And that when they send it back to you, it maybe becomes yours again or something. I don't even know. I would be speculating, and I don't want to do that. But whatever the case is, they went into bankruptcy, and that's first the part where you say, how are we going to pay the creditors, blah, blah, blah. Maybe we'll stay in business. Then they said, nope, we're liquidating. It's over. And so according to Diamond, what they get to do is actually liquidate all the stuff in their warehouse, not mail it back to people. But here's where it gets terrible.
Yeah, this is the bad part.
This is really the bad part. I mean, it's one thing to lose your money, right? So I've sent them 1,000 books. They didn't sell them. I lost the money on those books. But what Diamond is now going to do is they're going to liquidate those books, meaning that book that was $50 is going to go off to Five Below or I don't know, some liquidators, one of those retail stores, or just think of dollar stores, wherever it goes, right? And so now, if you're a publisher, your $50 book, which you're still selling on Amazon, on your website, in a store for $50, at a convention for $50, gamers can go and buy that thing at a discount store for $10. You're now competing against yourself because they just sold it, and you're not even getting a dime of the money that you're competing against yourself on.
Right.
So you're getting screwed every possible way: up, down, left, right, in, out, side, fourth dimensional, tesseracts, every way. You're getting tesseract screwed. And that's and the trouble is, so Stephen Glicker, the publisher, Roll for Combat, and he did a great video on this and talked about exactly what's happening to him. And he laid out that particular situation and the fact.
Where the hell did it go?
Oh, who knows? Who knows? We had pictures on the screen and now we don't.
I had a picture of him and it's gone. I don't know. Sorry.
But we're going to be talking in a few minutes about history and how cycles repeat, and what's old is new again, and all those kind of things. But this is where I wanted to ask you, Matt. So what's happening here? A few people mentioned in various online forums that it kind of reminded them of what happened to TSR at the end, where they had some problems with distributors. Do you know if there's some rhymes there?
I mean, it's not exactly the same, but there's a lot of similarities for sure. So if you're not aware, what happened in 1996 was that TSR's distributor, I want to say it was Random House, but I don't quite remember off the top of my head.
That sounds about right. That sounds right.
Yeah, I think it was Random House. Basically decided that all of this publication material that TSR had been feeding them wasn't going to sell. And they returned it to them and demanded millions of dollars back for the product. And there was a really weird contract that TSR had between them and Random House. I don't recall the specifics offhand, but it was something about them getting paid upfront for the materials before sales. But then there was really they were on the hook if Random House had the option to return it at any time that they wanted to.
That sounds pretty close to it, yeah, because what we talked about before about that consignment style thing, TSR was at least a big enough player that they could say, no, we want the money up front. But then that brought the risk
Yeah. And so what happened was the products weren't selling. TSR kept printing them out, and then they just got all of it returned. Like millions of dollars worth of product got returned, and it absolutely sunk them. It just basically destroyed the entire business.
Weren't they something like 5 million in debt at that point?
It was around that number. Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that where Wizards stepped in?
I mean, that's a whole other story. But yeah, Wizards didn't step in right then. But that's when they started shopping around to see if someone would be interested in purchasing TSR.
I just remember something about Wizards paying off some debts that they had to like take over the company.
Well, so in broad strokes, and Matt will correct me if I'm getting it wrong because he knows basically what I know. I learned from people like Matt.
Yeah,
but in broad strokes, a lot of times people say Wizards bought TSR. And I guess, I don't know, technically maybe, but I like to think of it more like Wizards bailed out TSR. They came in and they basically said, we'll pay off your debts and then we get the company after we do it.
Yeah, that's kind of what happened. The story is even weirder, though, because the company that made Legend of the Five Rings actually orchestrated the deal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they got purchased along with TSR because that was part of the deal that they kind of brokered between TSR and Wizards of the Coast.
I had no idea. I knew that so the lawyer that worked on that whole deal, we actually used him as our lawyer at the very beginning when we started Gygax magazine. So he told me a little bit of the background on it, but I didn't know about the Legend of the Five Rings folks.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that happened. It was kind of I mean, it was the only way to do it because Lorraine Williams at the time, she didn't want to really sell to Atkinson, but I mean, I don't know if she got desperate or she just realized it was the best she was going to get or what, but eventually through this other deal that got brokered, not directly with Peter, that's how the sale happened.
It's funny. We'll talk about this more when we get into your book, but the number of times that, somebody has had to come in and mediate things. And I'm just thinking about Mike Pondsmith with some of his mediation with Origin. We'll get there in a bit. But I didn't know that they had been mediated like that. And I mean, honestly, it probably was the best thing to do because in retrospect, here's another one. All the gamers for a long time loved to paint Lorraine Williams as this villain, right? And now the more that comes out over the years, as people really do the research and go into it and look at all of that, the more you kind of see she was actually a very good business person. She was making the decisions that had to be made. And so I believe that was probably the decision that had to be made right then and there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was that, or TSR goes up for auction and D&D goes one place and all the other properties go to 10 other places.
Or somebody just liquidates it and shuts it down completely, which could have happened. And we could have
that could have happened too.
Because I mean, look at all of the other, this is not a direct thing, but look at brands like Commodore or something, where they were on top of the game at one point, and then just the name gets sold here, there, and everywhere else. And, we wouldn't have D&D. I'm pretty sure, counterfactuals, you never know, right? But I would say, at least it's my opinion, we would not have D&D today if Peter Atkinson had not bailed them out.
Probably not.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think that's a good bet. I think that's a fair
bet. There were enough others that could have come up at the time, and who knows? And so that's what's happening with Diamond. What does it mean? Thankfully, we don't use them.
Yeah, no. So I did want to bring up something that like Scott had mentioned. This will put some publishers out of business, which it probably will. There's probably gonna be some indie publishers that go under. And Marvel and DC have their comics with Diamond as well. I'm pretty sure they do. Right. They'll probably be fine. I mean,
because their comics are not what keeps the company afloat.
No, they are not.
The comics are just what keeps the brand relevant, but it's the movies and the merchandise.
I'm thinking of the poor indie comics companies that may go out of business that might have been using them because they don't have that wiggle room. They don't. That's it. Their money they live hand to mouth. Most of them, I think. So I'm hoping this doesn't crush them because it's like basically take all your inventory and it's gone.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I know with my games, my games are with a different distributor, obviously, but like if this happened to me, I don't know what I would do. Honestly, it would not be good for my business, if not kill it outright.
Right. Yeah.
We're going to look back at this 5 to 10 year period in history. And it's going to look so simple in retrospect. We're going to just say COVID and then wait, I was thinking 3 things that hit us here. So COVID, this distributor thing, and I had a third one with the 3 big things that just hit the gaming industry all at once. Tariffs. That was the other one. That was the other one. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a mother.
Sorry, I've got I have a filter on my web browser. It's called the Trump blocker, so that I don't even see any news about it, because I just don't need that blood pressure.
Yeah, right.
So I'm thankfully forgetting what things were. But yeah, I think we're going to look back and we're going to see COVID, tariffs, diamond, and we're just going to see that as some sort of line on a chart. And I hope that that's going to be a line on a chart where we say everything was bad, but then it got better. But
we'll see.
We'll see. It's the thing I would say is this is the time to think about resilience.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I was reading. Oh, you know what? I do. I was reading there's a new book that came out about Douglas Adams recently. It's just to look back at his life and what he meant, how he impacted the world and everything else. And so as part of this, a lot of different big thinkers were coming in and having their philosophies on how the world is going to go and what do we need to do. And the big theme that came through a bunch of them was that overall, we tend to optimize instead of working on resilience. Companies, people, whatever, we spend so much time trying to get the most efficiency we can to optimize for the highest return or the highest effectiveness of something. But what we really should be doing is thinking about how many redundancies do we have? How much resilience do we have when something goes bad? So, Matt, you said that you don't distribute through Diamond. Do you distribute through a physical store distributor?
Yeah, I do. I mean, my games are very niche, like they're in very few stores, but yeah, they are through a distributor who does reach out to brick and mortar game stores. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, there was a point not that long ago when you needed to have that. If you didn't have a good distributor, you were nothing.
Right. There's no point.
And now we are at a stage where a lot of companies do well selling directly through their own platforms. I've even seen some selling on Etsy or eBay, bizarrely, but it happens. But the silverback gorilla at the moment is Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
So we have shifted a bunch of pallets of our games over to Amazon. We're still kind of getting spun up with what that's going to mean. But I think for us, I hate this. I hate that this is the truth. But I think Amazon's going to become our primary sales channel rather than retail stores.
Yeah, I mean, I think you might be right, and I hate it because, I mean, like, I know I put my games on Amazon, and I make something like 75% less for every sale on Amazon that I do
Really?
through my distributor. Yeah, it's way lower. Yeah.
Well, we'll have to talk about that because I think we're getting. I mean, if you're only getting 35 or 40% from the distributor,
yeah, Amazon. I mean, I have not put product on Amazon in a couple of years, particularly because of how much the margins were. But when I was putting it on, it was basically I put it on for kind of an awareness thing, and because it felt like if you couldn't find us on Amazon, you couldn't find us at all.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Were you doing fulfillment by Amazon?
No, I was not.
Okay, so that's what we're doing. We actually ship it to their warehouses, and I think they give you a better deal because that's what they want you to do.
Yeah, no, they do give you a better. I don't know what the numbers are, but I know that was a better option. But my, my print runs.
They only take about 30%.
Yeah, no, it was a good. It was a good chunk. I don't remember the exact number, but it was a lot. Yeah.
Well, the big advantage for us is, again, I'm saying all of this, and I'm just like, oh, I'm part of the problem,
right?
But the other big advantage for us is if we ship from our warehouse, it could take you a week to get a copy of our game. Amazon, from their warehouse, they got Amazon Prime. You could get it next day for free.
Yeah. Right. Well, the shipping was a big part of the problem I had because they would only let you charge, I think it was up to $10 for shipping. And I could not ship a board game for $10.
Oh, yeah, no.
Yeah, so I had to either eat that extra money or raise the price above MSRP. So that's where a lot of my loss came from.
I tried it for a little bit, doing shipping myself, and I was just like, I'm a terrible shipper. I'm horrible at it. I can't do it well, so I'm not get involved.
And the thing is, it's not hard. It's just that we have other things that we're doing in our life. Like we work, we have jobs that we work, and we can't just sit around and wait for, oh, look, an order came in. Let me go wrap that up and send it out.
Well, then also for every 100 orders you sell, you're going to have about 4 or 5 people that have a problem.
Yeah.
And then
you have to deal with
somebody's got a problem. You've got to spend a long time fixing it because not only do you have to fix it, you have to email back and forth with them. And I would always give people something free if they had a thing go wrong. And it's just, but it sucks because I want to go to a local, friendly local game store. I want to browse through the stuff. I love the owners of game stores. I love meeting people there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to lose that, but I don't know. I mean, if a company like Diamond just disappears with everybody's stuff, what do you do?
Yeah, that's tough.
No, it's tough, and it's
not an easy business.
No, I mean, I don't want to spiral this into another direction, but the tariffs are going to make it harder too, because that margin just makes it a lot more difficult, especially for, all of my games, their first print runs done by crowdfunding, and that just makes it a lot
most people
to make it, makes it a lot more difficult to get it into brick and mortar with increased prices up front with your landed costs. So
well, and the thing is, so I say that I block a lot of news, but it still filters its way through. And we had this pause, and a lot of this is because I'm getting constant emails from our printing partners over in China saying, "Hey, did you hear the tariffs have paused?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but for how long? I can't just do that because we have a card game that we're waiting to print until we know for a fact what is going on." And so they said, "Okay, it's paused. It's set at 30%, which is still astronomical, but at least we can budget for that." And now there's a new announcement saying that there's going to be a whole nother round of tariffs all over again. It's going to start all back up. And again, it's not even the amount, it's the absolute chaos. Because you have no idea what's going to happen in any minute. Because we no longer have a functioning set of adults running the federal government. We've just got a whole bunch of people running around kicking stuff over and laughing and setting things on fire. So it's like, well, and as long as that's happening, I can't do business with these people. It's almost like you hear about this a lot of times in little, international conflicts around the world where one side's like, we can't negotiate because we don't have a negotiating partner. Like we come to the table and those guys on the other side are just throwing shoes at us and lighting our socks on fire. And I feel like it's the same way. I'm like, I'd love to do business, but I don't know what you guys are going to do 5 seconds from now.
Right. And matter of fact, we have 2 card games we could put out. Yeah. But the margins on, and you probably know this, the margins on physical product like that, like card games, board games, stuff like that, the margin is much smaller than it is with books because books are cheap to print and deliver and all that kind of stuff. That's easy, right? But card games can be very expensive. I mean, like the what we would make is going to be small to begin with, and if you interrupt that, we make nothing, or it comes out of our pocket, and that's not good business to like spend all your time making something and then having to pay people to take it off your hands for you. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like you should at least make enough to cover your costs, right?
There's only 2 domestic card printers that are small enough that they would be able to work with us and give us a good rate, and both of them are garage industries. They're just some guy in his garage, and I can't get either one of them to reply fast enough. So I'm like, I can't work with this. I need people that,
But now, fortunately, we have a lot of products we could work on and deliver or put out. So we just put them on the shelf, and we're going to do that for now, right? We'll come back to those when it's
luckily we can just do books, and we have a local guy here in Connecticut who can do the books. So we know what we're dealing with, So it's all right. It's all right. But it's shocking to me how expensive and difficult it is to do cards. And we'll probably segue now over to Gathering of Gamers, because I'm just going to bring up once again Peter Atkinson and how shocked I am to this day that the thing that was one of the seismic shifts in the gaming industry was collectible card games, because my God, that's incredibly expensive to do. I mean, Peter tells this story a lot of the time, when he goes to conventions and he talks about the origins of Wizards and everything. And he tells the story of when they went to a convention and they were getting ready to sell Magic the Gathering, but they hadn't yet done the print run. They were just getting everybody playing the games. And basically he had no idea how they had already paid the printer the deposit, to start the card game. And they had no idea where they were going to get the money to finish paying for it.
Right.
He's just like, I hope this works. If it hadn't been for some like crazy cowboy from Dallas who came in and, covered the money to get him going, he took a crazy risk.
Yeah.
What I want to know, I would have taken.
Yeah, there was another game that came out by Steve Jackson of Game Workshop that was very similar to Magic, like just months before. And I've always been wondering about how they managed their costs for that, because that game did not go anywhere. Like,
right.
I don't remember the name off the top of my head to tell you what it even was, but
I think you mentioned it in your book, didn't you?
Yeah, I do. It is in the book. Yeah.
I just realized I've highlighted too many things in the book because I'm flipping through the highlights right now.
You can't
here we go. It was battle cards.
There it is.
Battle cards.
Yeah.
So we're gonna go to the book, but we're gonna jump out of order here for a second because I do want to talk about that because that is kind of crazy to me. So Steve Jackson had already done a CCG called Battle Cards, and then you mentioned that Peter Olotka from Cosmic Encounters had also explored the idea years before in 1979.
Yeah, no, he did, and it never went anywhere.
How did you find that out?
How did I find that out? Man, you got to check my footnotes. I don't remember off the top of my head. Right. I mean, I read it somewhere, but I don't remember if that was in a trade magazine or an interview, or it could have also been one of the oral histories I did for the interviews for this project.
This was one of the things. So let's segue now. So we're gonna start talking about Gathering of Gamers.
Yeah.
But we'll do the whole intro for it in just a moment here. But this is just one of the many things. So reading this book, there were a lot of things that I'd never known before, and I know lots of people who are historians of the game, and I've read everything that everybody's written. I thought I knew everything. I didn't.
Right.
And one of the big things I thought I knew that Richard Garfield.
Richard Chamberlain. I'll say, Jason.
I thought I knew that Richard Garfield had invented the collectible card game. I was wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, it might have been a matter of, what do you call that? Convergent evolution? I don't know if he was actually aware of battle cards. Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I don't know if he was aware of battle cards, but I'm pretty sure he knew about the Cosmic Encounters idea.
Okay. Well, at any rate, learned a lot of things. So let's talk about this. So I'll give the little segue intro here.
Yeah.
I will tell you what I think we're talking about, and Matt will tell me what we're really talking about.
Right. Yeah.
So with Gathering of Gamers, you have done a history primarily of Gen Con, but really of gaming conventions in general. You don't go into a lot of all the different gaming conventions or anything, but you talk about Gen Con and Origins and some of the other things around there. And what I feel like you've done here is you have done for the history of gamers coming together in conventions, kind of what John Peterson did for the history of the design of the games with Playing at the World.
Well, I will take that compliment. Thank you.
This is a 450 page or something like that tome that brings all the receipts. And this is because you are a professional archivist. You know how to do this stuff. What I didn't know is that you're actually a gripping writer and that you can really tell a story.
Yeah, you are.
So let's dive into this. Let's start talking about it. So
I will admit, Jason, you just did say 400 and some pages. I will admit I did not read the whole thing. I got a good chunk of it in, but I didn't finish it.
Well, here's how I'll put it. I have read all 454 pages. However, I've read the first half in a lot more detail than the second half. I turned into a speed reader in the second half, but that's okay because I plan to sit down and read the paper complete, the book in that when it comes out. I'm really looking forward to that.
When it comes out as a book.
So it's not out yet. Let's start with that, Matt. Tell us what you've made. Tell us when it's going to come out. Let's get kicking in.
Yeah. So I made Gathering of Gamers, which was meant to cover the history of tabletop, of specifically hobby tabletop, because I don't go into like Monopoly, Parker Brothers, any of that stuff. But hobby tabletop games in mostly the United States, although there is a divergence in there about Germany for a little bit.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, through 1967 until 2022. So basically, I wanted to cover the first 55 years of Gen Con and the proto year 67, where there was a not Gen Con convention, but run by the same group.
So before we dive into that, let's just talk a little bit about your background.
Yeah.
So you're a professional archivist, and you and I first met you through some documentary stuff that was going on. I don't know if we want to like name specific movies or anything like that. It's up to you.
We'll skip that part just because I think a couple of them don't have the best reputations because there were some legal conflicts and stuff that happened with them.
Which is completely outside of your involvement.
Yeah, I had nothing to do with that, but yeah. So, but yeah, I've been involved with a couple D&D documentaries, providing historical research for them and locating interview subjects and stuff. A lot of it, it's interesting because I got involved with this stuff back in 2012 when I wasn't exactly fresh out of grad school, where I went to school for history too, is partially why I was able to write this. I do have a background in history as well as archiving. But back then, like I remember going and talking at Frank Mentzer's house and trying to track down
Franken Party.
That wasn't his party. This was something separate.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. We were at his house going through some of his archival materials because Frank is a great archive. He saved absolutely everything from his time at TSR.
Yeah.
And we were trying to find some people. And I remember asking him if he knew about Jeff Perrin's whereabouts. And Frank's like, oh, no, he's dead. He's totally dead. And no, he is not. He is still alive. So there are
greatly exaggerated.
Yeah.
Rumors
but that's kind of what it was like back then, is we were looking for a lot of different people, a lot of materials, and just nobody really knew where this stuff was except for like John Peterson, who had been already in the game looking for a lot of these early materials for years at this point.
Well, in 2012, there was a small handful of people who really cared.
Yeah.
You know, like you said, John cared. So that's about the year. I think I met John in 2012. I think I met you about a year after that.
Yeah, 2013, 2014, something like that.
Something like that, yeah. And same year I met Bill Meinhardt and a few other people. So, you know, this is one of those bottlenecks through which the history could have been lost if it were not for the passions of a small number of people.
Yeah, it was wild to me. What do you guys, before we go any further, what do you think the reason is for that? All of a sudden, like there's 3 documentaries being made and books being written. Just like all of a sudden there was this nobody was really into documenting all this. And then all of a sudden it seemed like a lot of people were.
So I can answer that because this happens in archives a lot. And it really comes down to 2 things. One is legacy and the other is nostalgia. So there were 2, they kind of converged because you had a lot of people who were involved in the early days of gaming history that were coming to end of life and they knew it. So they started worrying about their legacy and what to do about it. So that meant they were willing to talk. They were willing to share their collections. They were willing to do these things. And then I can't speak to John's reasons, but I know for several other people, they were nostalgic for the game from what they grew up when they were kids, teenagers, whatever. And they were in a position, they were historians or documentarians or whatever, and they wanted to go and revisit that past. So the 2 kind of just happened to converge at the same time. And that's why that initially blew up. Why it's continued to blow up since then. I mean, I have things I could speculate on, but that's why it initially happened.
Well, I mean, the whole hobby is blowing up right now, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think in the case of John's reasons, this is relevant to the nostalgia question, which is that so I'm involved in a few different hobbies where nostalgia comes into it, right? Which is funny because I don't like nostalgia, honestly. I don't.
I think you do.
No, I don't. I really don't. And here's the thing. Because people who know that I am into classic cars or that I collect computers or that I, collect gaming history, they think, oh, you like old stuff. So they'll come to me and be like, I have this old thing. I'm like, yeah, but it sucked. I don't want it. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't have a nostalgia. I'll be perfectly honest. The 90s were a crappy decade.
Yeah, they weren't so good.
They sucked. And so did the 80s, to be perfectly fair. These decades sucked.
I like the 80s.
But there were good things during them. I like the things that were I like when somebody makes a great game, when they make a great computer, when they make a great car. but you're not going to make me feel nostalgic for a 1986 Chevy Chevette.
No.
I'm not going to feel nostalgic for it.
Horrible car.
Yeah. So anyway, the thing with John Peterson or anybody like that is that you go through a period in your life when you're young, you don't have any money, you're a kid, you might not even have a job yet, and you just have a good time. You have the stuff. And then you go through the next phase in your life where you still don't have the money because you're in your 20s and you're trying to get established. And then eventually you get to an age, whether it's your 30s or your 40s or whatever it is, where you start saying, okay, now I have a little time. Now I have a little money. I can actually indulge these things that I care about. In John's case, he had built up enough success in his own life that he could afford to take the time to go and actually study the things that he cared about. And so he put 5 years of solid study and work into just understanding what was going on before he wrote a word of his first book. And it's just, that's a difficult thing to do. You cannot do that in your 20s.
That's a good, that's a freaking great point, because if you were like me, if you were in your early teens when you started playing role-playing games like D&D, like, so I started in 1980, I was 10 at the time. So I get to an age where I get out and I start working. Now I didn't start having a family until later, but most people would have had a family a little earlier than that. The general person would have a family earlier than that. Basically. Yeah. Everybody's different. But anyway, and by 2012, you're talking about, that's where people's kids, most of the, like, again, these generic relationships would have kids that were kind of old enough to where they now have free time to like do other things, and they've built their career up enough that they can, they're not like working their ass off to build their career up. They're in a good spot. So yeah, that would actually make a lot of sense. That's like a golden spot for people to like start going, oh, I want to do this thing now. And then I know a lot of people who got out of gaming when they became adults and then got back into it a little later. I think, Jason, you went through that a little bit, right?
What do you mean?
Well, like you didn't role play for a little while. You took a little break from it because you were doing other things. Yeah, you were doing other things.
Because I was busy. I was starting a company.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. You're doing other things.
So I'm personally lucky because in some of these things that I collect, because so we mentioned Bill Meinhardt. I'm going to go out, not even on a limb. I'm just going to say I think Bill Meinhardt's probably the #1 collector of fantasy role-playing materials in the world. I don't think anybody challenges him for that crown. And the reason is not because he waited until he was, able to afford it, because when he was a teenager, he's like, I think I want this stuff. And he started keeping one of everything. So his collection is, who knows what it's worth, but it's not because he's a billionaire. It's because he had the foresight. Yeah. In my case, I was collecting so-called vintage computers and video games, even when I was about 21 or 22, because I was like, you know what, these are important. I'm going to keep these. I would pick them all up. Right. So now I have a good collection because of it. But generally, I think you're right. It's when you hit that sweet spot, and you kind of, as a collector myself, you start seeing the patterns and you start understanding that there is a life cycle to these things. They're new, and then they're just kind of old and out of date and nobody wants them, and then they shoot up.
That happens a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
It was everything. And then, the other side.
It totally makes sense.
Well, the other side nobody likes to talk about is then eventually they go down again when all the people that grew up with it sadly die off.
Right.
And if you want to see
and then the younger generation's like, I don't give a crap about that.
If you want to see an example of that, look at radio hobbyists.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking to me to see people who have built up these collections that were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars at one point, and now they're just some old radio. I don't know.
Right. We're seeing that happen in gaming now with wargamers in particular. I mean, I see so many wargaming collections that are amazing collections, and they can't give this stuff away. Like, it's
so sad.
Yeah,
you can give it to me. I'll take some.
I will just dig into the chat here for a second from Scott. He says the 80s sucked. I thought we could be friends.
Hey, I'm with Scott.
We will battle that one out in the Discord afterwards.
Yeah. That's cool.
Let's get into Gathering of Gamers. Let's talk about this.
I'm gonna pull this up here. There's the first picture. So just start ahead, and you got a picture to look at.
All right. So we're going to talk about the difference, between the things that happened here. But I want to start out even earlier than the picture we're looking at here, because what I was amazed at in this book is that, as far as I can tell, Matt, you have managed to nail down the date of the first gaming convention.
Yeah.
Would you say that the Malvern, Pennsylvania one was the first one?
It's the first one I'm aware of. It's the first one Avalon Hill touted.
Let's describe it. Let's say what it was when it was.
Yeah. So in 1967, there was a gaming convention by the IFW, the International Federation of Wargamers.
Previously, the USCAC.
Yes. And they held it in what is currently a middle school in Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. And it had a small number of people. They tried to fund a huge kind of, it was like a buffet kind of dinner thing that they just couldn't get the money for, and it pretty much almost broke them. But it was a big deal for like Avalon Hill and the other war game publishers at the time, because there were, one of the big problems people had at the time was just finding people to play these games, because there weren't many war gamers out there. And so what a lot of them did at the time was they would reach out in things like the Opponents Wanted section of magazines like The General, which Avalon Hill ran, trying to find people. And they might, if they're local, awesome. If not, they'd play by mail, take weeks, if not months, to play through these games.
Right.
So coming together was a big deal and could really help kind of explode the hobby a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's possible there were other gatherings that you might call conventions that happened before this one, but this is certainly the first one that was like really publicly pushed.
Well, so here's something that's really amazing. So we've got a few pictures to put up on the screen from time to time, but I wanted to make sure we were not showing any of the pictures from the book, because, as we said, the book is still coming out soon, and you've got some great photos in here.
Wait a minute. There's one that you sent me.
Well, yeah, but it's not from the book.
It's not okay.
No, I didn't send you anything from the book, because people should buy it and see it. But this particular thing, people can go find it on their own if they want. So you've got the cover of the Avalon Hill General, Volume 4, number 1, and it's got photos. So we have photos of the first gaming convention ever. And my wife loved it when she came in and she saw it, because her joke was, a priest, a general, and a nerd walk into a gaming convention.
That's awesome.
Yeah. On the cover we have William Spear, who was the guy behind it, right?
Yeah, he was the main.
Does he go by Bill Spear?
That I don't know. I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah.
Is he still around?
I do not believe so. At least I haven't found contact for him.
Okay. And then Colonel Edgar Owen, Father George Peach. We have a Catholic priest. That's and awesome. Another person here. Do you know why there was a Catholic priest and a military colonel at the first convention?
Well, the military colonel was because they were like Avalon Hill and the others really wanted to push kind of the relationship between wargaming and the military. And it's also, I'm not sure if this is true in the late 1960s, but for many years, hobbyist wargamers would get into the military through their wargaming hobby. Particularly, I'm sure you're aware that there's professional wargaming at the military, and for other sort of crises and conflicts is a thing. So people who got those jobs originally often came from the hobbyist wargaming circle. I'm not sure when exactly that happened, but it was something the military was interested in, and they were happy to support the hobby.
Well, this is where the nice little crossover between your book and John Peterson's first book come in, because before I read John Peterson's book, I didn't know that one of the reasons that the Prussians were seen as the greatest military on earth for a while is because they did wargaming.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found this just amazing that there's a picture of this here, and we start getting into the whole question of, what are conventions and where do they start? So I'm going to just call it the first gaming convention. If somebody ever comes in and has a better one, fine.
We'll accept it. Yeah.
Sure.
As far as we know, right?
Like science fiction conventions have been happening since what, the 30s?
At least, maybe even earlier.
Really?
Worldcon. Whenever Worldcon started, right?
Yeah.
I think that was the first one. But in your book, you even talk about when one of this people who had only gone to sci-fi conventions came to their first gaming convention. They're like, there's things to do.
Yeah, that was a big thing. They went to, I think the quote even says something like, you go to sci-fi conventions to be there, but you go to gaming conventions to do things.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So, I mean, and they had, cosplaying started like in the 1940s, I think. I've seen pictures of the early cosplayers at Worldcon in like the 30s or the 40s.
Jason, I love those pictures. When I see those old school cosplayers, I mean, like before there was this term cosplay, or people did cosplay, or like back in the day. It's amazing to see these. I ran across a video, and I think it was 68 or something, and they were performing. No, it was a little later now. It was called it's called Gonad the Barbarian, but it was a play, and it was at a big convention or something, and it was like an hour and a half long play that they had filmed of people back in the early 70s doing this Conan parody. It was awesome.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I mean, so we have photos of people going back to like the 1930s or the 40s, showing up dressed in science fiction costumes at science fiction conventions. And we talked to Lee Gold back years ago, and she talked about people showing up in costume in the 60s. But so you have these convergences of different types of conventions. The idea of a convention started with science fiction fans, but the actual idea of a gaming convention started with war gamers, and you found the photos.
Yeah, the photos, they exist. They are out there. And I have to say, I have to give credit to John Peterson for some of these early chapters, because he definitely helped me with some of these sources.
Of course,
because they are very difficult to come by, as you can imagine. So,
well, it's amazing, honestly, that we have any of this at all.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's very impressive some of us survived. Like, there's a few fanzines I have that I think their initial circulation was like well under 100 people. And I can't imagine like that they've, after sitting in someone's drawer, their garage or whatever for 60 years, still survive.
But, it's funny because even though there was only a couple of hundred people, the fact that you can find one, in a way, so we think about the internet as being, it's a record forever. There are so many things that are just gone because it was just on a website that the Internet Archive didn't get to in time.
Yeah.
And,
that was a big part of this. That was a big part of this book, honestly, was that when you get into the late 90s and to today, is like the Internet Archive was a huge benefactor, or not benefactor, but they really, my book benefacted from their work, because there were so many things that I tracked down in print publications or things like that, and websites, and they don't exist anymore. They're on forums that have been taken down. I mean, really, it's going to be, I'm glad I wrote this book now, because I really think in even 10 more years, like a lot of it is just going to be lost. And some of these chapters from 2000 on would have just been much more difficult to actually write.
Oh yeah. Did you work with Jason Scott directly?
No, I did not.
Okay. Great guy. I mean, it's amazing. We talk about bottlenecks that, he's one of those things. If there was no Jason Scott, there would probably not be an Internet Archive the way we see it today. And there certainly wouldn't be a lot of the things that we have. And I normally in a book, I gloss over the introduction. I'm like, okay, yeah.
Let's get to the book, right?
And especially, but more than anything, what do you gloss over? You gloss over the thanks. You're like, okay, thanks to Dave and my wife and everybody else. But this one, I love the thank you section at the introduction is actually filled with good stuff. Just knowing, what it took to get to this place. And the Internet Archive, you point out that they're one of the main reasons.
So just real quick, Nick Seidler says Forrest J. Ackerman and Meetup Myrtle Douglas were the first to cosplay in 1939 at Worldcon.
Yes. There you go. Thank you, Nick. Yeah. And by the way, Ed Lopez is saying, can you put the book title in the chat? So we'll repeat it again and we'll put it in the chat. It's called Gathering of Gamers by Matt Shoemaker. And Matt, when is this going to come out?
So the exact publication date isn't set, but it's soon. It's going to be probably either late August or September.
And who's the publisher?
It is Play Story Press. They are an academic press, and they do all sorts of books based on basically play.
Okay. So. Yeah, I assumed it would be something academic because, I know John publishes through MIT Press. So this definitely, I sound like I'm blowing smoke, but I think this is going to be a very, very, very. I think this is going to get cited a lot.
I hope so.
I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, I glossed over a little bit about your own academic background. So can you tell us what an archivist is? Like, what is your background to doing this? What does it mean in a broader outside of the gaming world sense?
Yeah, sure. So first off, to become an archivist, it's a little tricky, especially these days. So my academic background, what I went to school to learn to do this, was I went to grad school for master's degrees in both library science with a concentration in archival studies, as well as a second degree in history. So it takes a lot of stuff to get into that. And then what archivists do, I mean, there's a variety because there's multiple different kinds of archivists. But generally speaking, is they work with collecting and organizing historical documents from either prominent people or prominent institutions or just things that they think will be historically significant at some point in the future, and describing them in a way that other historical researchers can find them and then use them for their research. Because we don't know who's going to come into our door exactly. I mean, early on in my career, I started at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, which has one of the oldest and largest collections of early Americana in the United States and also the world.
It makes sense.
Yeah. So like we know we're going to get a lot of people coming in doing research on, like George Washington or the Declaration of Independence or whatever. But we also collected other interesting things. Like there was one collection of Mary Elizabeth Hallett Greenwald, who is basically the woman who invented the laser light show. And she was in like, I believe it was the 1920s at Longwood Gardens out here in Philadelphia. And
wait. The 1920s?
20s.
Yeah. Awesome. So wait, I thought you needed Pink Floyd in order to have a laser.
Yeah, right.
No, so she composed music and then she painted on cellophane colors that would play on like a kind of like a film reel that would be broadcast through a spotlight that would accompany her music.
Can you say her name again?
Mary Elizabeth Hallett Greenwald or Greenwalt. I forget. It's been many years since I've worked with her collection, but
amazing.
But yeah, there's stuff like that in archives, and it's because somebody decided to save it, and we do. We sometimes we go out and try to acquire things. Sometimes families bring stuff to us, and we have to make decisions about what to keep and what to, because space is limited. You only have so much space in your building, so you got to decide what to keep and how to organize that material for other historians to use.
Well, and is there a lot when you're doing these things? Are you working in a common structure? Do you have a like library science people do? Do you have a common language that you speak in order to categorize these things?
Yeah, generally speaking. Although I will say, like the authoritative terms and things, a lot of them you're making them up as you go.
Really,
as you're dealing with unique collections. So you're creating them, you're registering with Library of Congress, and that becomes the official term. So
okay, so I'm going off topic here, but I'm very interested in the side of it because you mentioned the Library of Congress. Tom Scott, one of my favorite YouTubers, did a great thing about. I love that dude. He's so fun. I ran into him on the street in New York City, and I made an idiot of myself.
Oh shit! Okay.
I was like, Tom Scott, you don't know me, but I know you, and he's like, ugh. He was right outside of my office, and I was coming out to get lunch, and there was Tom Scott. I'm like, that's weird. But anyway, he did a great video on what the UK does, because the UK requires everybody who publishes in the United Kingdom has to give one copy to their version of the Library of Congress, whatever it is.
Okay.
You know what it's called, Matt?
No, I don't know what it is. Sorry.
Whatever. We'll call it the Royal Library. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So they have one of everything that's ever been published in the United Kingdom. And so I don't know. It just seems incredibly important to me to have that.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, Library of Congress does something similar where you have to register everything, but I don't believe they have an actual copy of everything.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I feel more with the. Yeah.
We send them a copy of everything we do. I've sent the Library of Congress a copy of everything I've made since I was 19.
Really?
Just so that, I mean, I always send them a copy because I'm like, well, you know what? If somehow through some miracle we survive the next couple of centuries as a nation and the Library of Congress still exists, I'd like my great grandkids to be able to go look up my name.
Yeah, no, I feel the same thing. I actually, every game that I put out, I've given to like not to the Library of Congress, but to the Strong National Museum of Play for the same reasons, basically. So.
Yeah, let's talk about them for a second, because I have not been to see them in person yet, but I forget which of the fanzines. There was some gaming zine from the early 70s or late 60s that I really wanted to see, and they're the only place that has like a full run of them. So, and I called them up and they were like, "Oh yeah, just make an appointment. You can come in and just, put on the white gloves and you can touch them."
Yeah.
I didn't even know these things existed, you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew there was a Library of Congress. I just didn't know that, like, I didn't know we were sending, or like you, I mean, well, by you sending our products, it's we sending, but whatever.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was a thing. That's cool.
Yeah.
The Strong Museum, what's Rochester?
Yeah, it's in Rochester, New York. But yeah, that's what archives are basically. Archives are for unpublished materials. Libraries are for published materials. That's a good way to think of the distinction. But usually, yeah, you can go in and see and use a collection. You can't check it out in almost ever. There's some exceptions to that, depending on the institution. But yeah,
you'd have to have a darn good reason.
Yeah. Well, there's some programs, like normally the materials stay in the building, but like the Wisconsin archival system for the public archives, they will mail their stuff around to different archives in the country, or not in the country, but in the state. Mm-hmm. So, which is nice, because usually, if I'm in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, so if I want to see something in Pittsburgh, they're not shipping it to Philly for me. I got to go out to Pittsburgh to see it.
Yeah.
So,
well, and the thing is that if our collective memory as a culture or as a species, pretty much that's who we are. If you don't have a memory, you don't exist. Imagine being a person who couldn't remember yesterday. Who would you be? Right. So these things, and they can have very practical advantages too. Like, I live near Yale. So another of the things that I happen to be really into is printing techniques. So I have a lot of mimeographs from like through the 1940s through the 1970s. I bought a mimeograph machine. I didn't know there's something I needed to do, and Yale University had saved all of the manuals for it. So I was able to go to their archivist and say, can I come down and look at the manuals? It would not have existed if an archivist hadn't actually cataloged it properly and put it there.
Yeah, that's very true.
And so here we are with gaming. So we've had John Peterson put together a wonderful history of how did we get from, 4th century BC versions of chess up to Kriegspiel and Dungeons and Dragons. And now we have a book that says, how did we get Gen Con?
Yeah, right.
Where did that come from? And speaking of Gen Con, another thing you put in the book, tell me if I'm giving away too many spoilers.
It's fine so far.
Yeah. But Gen Con 0 may not have happened.
Yeah. That is my personal belief. I can talk about this a little more, because I didn't talk about it too much in the book, because honestly I thought it might ruffle some feathers. But
ruffle away. The truth is, not the truth, but facts are facts.
Right. Yeah. I mean, part of it too is this is my opinion. I don't have hard proof backing this one up.
Right.
That's the other reason.
But unfortunately, who can we ask?
Exactly. But no, I believe the whole Gen Con 0, we'll call it a myth, I guess, came about for Gary Gygax to claim more ownership over Gen Con than he may have deserved. Don't get me wrong, Gygax deserves a huge amount of credit for starting Gen Con and getting it going, but a lot of it goes to the IFW as well. Yeah. And I think saying that he had a Gen Con 0 at his house in 1967 when that Malvern convention was going on was just a way to kind of stake a claim.
So let's give a little background here. So what we had was in 1966, William Spear started something called the United States Continental Army Command. I love how serious this sounds.
I know, right?
Yeah. The USCAC. And was it William Spear who was not able to get a commission? Was that the guy?
No. That was Charles S. Roberts.
Okay, that's the Avalon Hill founder. Well, anyway, so William Spear started this group for a wargaming club, right?
Yeah.
Because, if you're a wargamer in the 50s or the 60s, who are you going to play with? Where are you going to find another nerd? So he starts the USCAC, which eventually gets renamed to the IFW, the International Federation of Wargamers, to show that it's not just, I don't know.
United States.
How is it? What was the reason they changed it?
Because they had some international membership to make it sound more worldly, basically.
Okay. I have some of those early IFW newsletters, and they are such a joy to read.
Yes.
So we start with him. He gets a wargaming convention together, and this kind of converges with the birth of all of this. So you have who is the founder for Avalon Hill again? Charles
S. Roberts.
Right. So Charles S. Roberts starts this thing, and eventually he runs into some financial trouble, and it gets basically bought out by his printer. And that's where Tom Shaw steps in, right?
Just before you go any further, Jason and I both were talking offline, and we were like surprised that this guy just disappears. Like,
Charles Roberts.
Yeah, like he's in the history of all this, and then all of a sudden, doop, gone. Like,
I mean, he did totally disappear. I think part of it is, I mean, you got to remember, a lot of people, it's easy to focus on things like Gen Con and stuff and TSR because of how big Dungeons and Dragons was. Yeah. Charles S. Roberts, although not immediately, did get involved and brought into things like Origins. Like there's a Charles S. Roberts Award, which
okay, all right. So he didn't just completely disappeir. Okay, I didn't know that.
It was on, like, one of my games was actually nominated for the Charles S. Roberts Award a couple years ago.
Who runs that award?
I think it's like I don't remember their exact name, but it's
which convention or where?
It's like the Charles S. Roberts Award Foundation or something like that. I don't remember.
I'm glad to hear that.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. So we're still in the prehistory here, but basically, so you have Charles S. Roberts, who is in the military. He starts out enlisted, and he goes in the National Guard. There's a program where they had set up a path to a commission in the Army, and they took the program away. So he didn't have that available. So he's like, well, fine, I'll make war games.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
But the trouble is, as any of us who are gamers and publishers and designers know, being a great gamer is not the same as knowing how to run a business. So he runs into some trouble, and thank goodness, although I will say I would love to see Tom Roberts or Thomas Shaw's name in here. But so Thomas Shaw comes in, and he's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm the only guy left. And he figures out how to keep Avalon Hill going, right? He works with the printers. He keeps Avalon Hill alive, and he starts the General, which is a little zine, not a zine, but it's a magazine. Yeah. And that's where we see this is where some of the characters first arrive. Like in the first or second episode of the General, or issue of the General, you see all of these editors from around the country. They're editors, right? So it's like I'm the Southwest editor, I'm the Northwest editor, I'm the Florida editor. And it's just teenagers who are like, I'll write some articles for free. But there's one guy who's an Air Force major, something, named Lou Zocchi, who's like, he becomes the Southwest editor. And he then goes on to become this big figure in all of this. So you have this very nascent hobby with a bunch of individuals just doing stuff to try to get going. And eventually they're like, hey, why don't we all meet up somewhere? And so you finally get a gaming convention in 1967. And then things kind of go on from there. And some guy named Gary Gygax apparently likes wargaming. Who's he? Yeah. Right?
I mean, at the time, that was very, very true. Yeah.
All he is somebody who just is really prolific. Because you find any wargaming newsletter or anything, you'll find his byline in there somewhere. And honestly, I think that is the secret behind who Gary Gygax was, is that he just was prolific. He worked harder than anybody else. Simple as that. And eventually you get a Gen Con 1. But before that, you have the sort of the what you call the myth of Gen Con 0, where it was basically maybe 8 people stayed at his house, maybe they didn't.
Yeah, he had people over regularly, like once a month at least, to play games of around 8 people. Yes. So just because he happened to have 8 people at his house the same time around this Malvern convention happened, maybe they were there, maybe they weren't, but like, is that really a gaming convention worthy of being called Gen Con 0? I mean, I personally would say no, but you can argue it, I suppose.
That'll be a fun one for people to argue about in bars.
Right.
Yeah. But eventually we do get Gen Con 1. And that's horticultural, right?
Yep, that's horticultural
hall. Yep.
Right. And so Gen Con 1 actually happens. We know this. And here's another bottleneck. If it wasn't for a single person, we wouldn't know John Bobeck.
Yep.
I met John Bobeck at the 50th anniversary of that first Gen Con. So you were there, Matt, right?
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah. So we all went over. It was 1 year at GaryCon. It was the 50th anniversary of the first Gen Con. So what would that be?
2017.
17. Thank you.
Yeah.
Which I thought was the most amazing experience because it was people who had been there just coming back for like their class reunion. And John Bobeck was there and he was walking me around and showing me all the places. And he was the teenager who was walking around with a camera capturing all of this.
Yeah. Like all the pictures we have from back then are pretty much thanks to John Bobeck.
Yeah. If it wasn't for one teenager who had a good camera and who wanted to take pictures, we would not know what it looked like.
Yeah.
But we do.
That's awesome.
So Gen Con starts there, and that really is at the time it was not, Dungeons and Dragons did not exist yet.
Correct. Yeah.
So kind of characterize what that was like.
So I think it was really just kind of a giant, I guess I'll say it, like kind of an orgy of gameplay.
Yeah.
Like just people coming together. Some of them got there very early and crashed Gygax's house.
There was no reserving tables. There was no signing up for games.
You just showed up and play as a bunch of people playing games.
Yeah, just showed up and you just played games nonstop over and over. Like these people were overjoyed. For many of them, it was the first time they got to play an opponent face to face.
And officially, it was a one-day convention.
Officially, yeah, but they played into Sunday and just pretended they were cleaning up the place.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
I love that in the book where you're like, and then it was cleaning up until 3:00 in the afternoon. It's like
right,
rolling dice and cleaning up.
Yeah.
But they started early. They started on a Friday at Gary's house.
Yep.
And then Saturday was the convention, and then it just kind of kept going.
Yep. Yeah, I think it was really hard for some of them to go because this is what they want to do. They love wargaming so much, and a lot of them, like I said, a lot of them play by mail was all they had, and now this is so much different playing someone in person. I can't even imagine what some of those games were like because play by mail game, you have a few days to think about moves. Not that a war game is swift, but it's a lot faster in person than that glacial pace of having a play by mail game for sure.
Right. We had a friend of ours move across when I was like 14. One of my friends moved to California and we did a role-playing game that was play by mail. Again, 1984, before the internet was really, the internet existed, but none of us had it, right? Because it was still like whatever. Anyway, and we did a play by mail game for a while and we got almost nothing done and months would go by. And I was just like, this sucks. I don't like doing this. I don't want to play this anymore.
Theoretically, you could have played faster. I heard somebody, it was an audiobook or a podcast where they were like, oh, back in the 50s, mail would take a week. No, it didn't. You had 2 mail deliveries a day. There was morning mail and evening mail. If you sent somebody a letter, they would get it fast.
Mm-hmm. These games were popular. Flying Buffalo, that was their main business model for years, was play by mail games.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have this first convention and it's at the Horticultural Hall. They're coming together for the first time. And for the first few years, it was just war games. And there was another thing there. I'm trying to find the name of it here in my notes. There was some sort of not diplomacy, but everybody was playing diplomats for their countries. It was called, here it is, the Internation Simulation.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so you can think of that as kind of like a proto mega game kind of thing. I mean, it's not clear to me exactly how it was played. I know like John Bobek, I'm pretty sure played in them, and some other people who are still around from them, like maybe even Mike Carr would know. Although it doesn't sound like something he might have played, but I'm sure he gave it a try. But yeah, that was something that would happen. They'd play it out in the lawn all together and kind of, I guess
it was almost model UN kind of game.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's weird because somewhere, and I don't know where I heard this term, but I heard the term seminar games.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that that's what this meant. Things like the Internation Simulation, where everybody, people play this to this day at Gen Con. They still play, not that one, but they
play NASCRAG now. Yeah.
What's it?
NASCRAG? Or I'm sorry, not NASCRAG. That's the wrong one. I forget. But yeah, there is a version of it that they still play.
Yeah, there's a name for it. And the first Gen Con I ever went to, they were playing it, and I hated it.
Yeah, NSDM, that's what it is.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I heard it. They were called seminar games, and I've talked to people who were at that first Gen Con, and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. So
in all the written sources I looked at, because you mentioned this to me, I think at Page last year when I ran into you, and the term seminar game I never found anything written about it anyway.
Yeah, I've got to find out where I got that. Maybe it was just an imagination in my head. But for these first few years, it was this kind of stuff, highly, I hate to say nerdy, but just highly detailed stuff. You've got to really be into that. And then at some point, Gen Con changes because, 73, I forget which Gen Con that was, but now they had a proto D&D being played.
Yeah, I mean, there was that, and then 74 was actually out. 74 is really when it started taking off, and Gen Con is really what let D&D spread, because it was not going to go out without that. But that's really what started changing, not just Gen Con, but gaming conventions across the country.
Yeah, because before that, it was very unstructured. Some people came in with things that were really well thought out, and there's great war games and everything, but it was just a completely different thing. To talk about how nerdy it got before the D&D showed up. One of the things was in the war games. So Dave Wesley, was he at the first one, or was
I actually don't know if he was at the first one.
Okay, but he was at one of the very first ones.
Yeah.
And the great thing about where we are in the world right now is you can still meet and hang out with people who were at those first ones, like obviously Mike Carr.
Yeah.
Mike Carr, who has been at every Gen Con since #1.
Yep.
But Dave Wesley, who is a major in the Army, we still call him Major Wesley when we see him, in person. And he actually showed up at one of those early ones with an analog computer that he had built for the purpose of solving battles. I think we have a picture of it here. Yeah, there we go.
There it is.
Yep. So this is a photo I took. This was at the Horticultural Hall, the 50th anniversary. He brought the computer out to show everybody how it worked. And Matt, I'm honestly honored that you chose to use this in your book.
Oh yeah, well, I had to put something in because I figured I could not succinctly describe what it was in words. So the picture helps because
this is so hard for me to imagine how you use this.
Well, it's great. I took a photo of the back of it, which I didn't send you, but it's just wires, because a computer is nothing but a bunch of logic circuits, right? You can make a computer out of plastic with nothing. In fact, I'm going to run over and grab one really quickly. Talk amongst yourselves.
Okay. So he would adjust variables on this, and then what would it give him? Like where it would tell what is the output?
Yeah, I don't know where it outputted on the device, but what the point of it was to figure out, like, when a ship was hit in a sea conflict, like how many soldiers would have been killed.
Is it that dial on there? Like I'm looking at the middle. Like if you look right underneath the handle, was
all the different dials. All the different dials you see on there are hard coded to different types of variables, and you basically say, if I put this variable here and this one here and this one here, and then I hit the button, I run the circuit. What's the result going to be?
What I'm saying is the result shown on the right below the handle, there's like a meter. Is that what shows you the answer?
So you have a meter there that kind of looks like a multimeter, right?
Yeah.
And it's basically a question of where does the voltage reach? So if the voltage reaches a certain level, it means one thing. If it reaches another level, and it means another thing. But when people talk about computers, they think of things you type on and do everything, but you can physically make them. So what I have here, I'm going to just bring it up on the screen for a second.
Here, hold on. Let me open. There we go.
So this right here is another thing from about the same year, 1967. It's called the Digicomp 1. And this, it's just a bunch of pieces of plastic, but believe it or not, this is a computer.
Okay.
So what you can do with this thing is you can set all these different logic gates, and then when you pull the little thing and make the rubber bands go, it changes what the number is that's going to show up. And it's a computer. You're just using rubber bands instead of electricity. And so what Dave Wesley did was he built this completely from scratch. He just came up with all of the electrical circuits that would be needed and figured out how you could resolve war game results with electricity, basically. Wow. This is the level of amazing obsession that was going on in those first years.
That is cool.
Yeah. But that obsession did not wane. It just changed shape. So the first big change was D&D shows up, right?
Yeah, D&D is the first big change.
Yeah. So we're going to now look at the years between when D&D first arrives and it turns into what we might recognize as a modern version of a convention. In those years, how did it grow? How did the idea of conventions shift and change?
Well, I mean, honestly, they grew a lot thanks to Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, one of the things that earlier drafts of the book went a lot heavier into the data. I mean, part of my day job, I'm a digital humanist on the side, which means
that?
So the digital humanities are a field. Like I've been working with AI back when we used to call it machine learning since like 2013 or whatever. But so we would do things in the humanities like take 10,000 romance novels or whatever, shove them into a computer, analyze the words, and see what came out the other end. Like if it could tell us about, and we can find out all sorts of different things when we do that. We can find out authorship. If we don't know who wrote something, we can analyze how they wrote, their writing style, and figure out what the book is. Or we can, just find out different themes of books. Or there's even something called topic modeling, which will tell you generally without reading a book, what a book is about. So all these kinds of things. So one of the big things I wanted to do with this book, which really comes out in the last chapter, I think, where I do some of the data analysis, but all throughout it is look at the event numbers and see what people were playing and doing. And when you look at the event numbers for shows like Gen Con or Origins, is that Dungeons and Dragons is just absolutely dwarfing everything. Yeah. And it's doing that for ages. So D&D is really the thing that made it grow to begin with. And then this probably doesn't come as a surprise to you two, but other people it might. But the whole James Dallas Egbert situation, when that happened, really caused it to just explode, which I'm sure you're doing. Which people, it made D&D blow up, which made Gen Con and other conventions where you could play D&D also blow up.
Right. So, for anybody who doesn't know, James Dallas Egbert disappeared in some steam tunnels, and the narrative to the general world was that a D&D player got too into the game, went into the steam tunnels, and killed himself. The truth was that he was fine. He got found soon afterwards. Very, very tragically, he did eventually die by suicide, and that is a tragic fact. But that's not what happened at the time. But what's the phrase? A lie can get round the world before the truth can get its boots laced up.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the narrative began, and so now you have this world where everybody is either afraid of D&D because they think their kids are going to become Satanists, or they're excited because they're like, "Ooh, I could be a Satanist."
Right.
Well, not really, but when you're a teenager, anything that scares your parents is exciting. Like, ooh, heavy metal, punk rock, Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Any of that.
Yep. So that was a big driver. But you got to remember, even back then in the late 70s, early 80s, like Gen Con was most likely the biggest convention at the time. I'm safe to I'm pretty confident in saying that it was the biggest con at the time.
Yeah, before Origins existed.
Yeah, we're still only talking like 5,000 people, which, isn't
was it
small.
that big before Origins?
No. But around the Origins and Gen Con kind of, not before Origins. I'm talking like just up to like 1985 or so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, back in 75, I think Origins was 1,500 people. And that was significantly, I forget Gen Con's number, but it was smaller because there was a whole fight about that. But
yeah, you do some good stuff in the book here. So in the appendix, you really get into the numbers and you show the charts and you have really great stuff like that.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you call out is how hard it is to accurately gauge attendance because they count it differently.
Yeah, they counted differently, and they also lied about it because they would want to show up other conventions. So, I mean, that's why I try to make my best guess at attendance numbers when I call them out, because I don't call them out for every single year. But honestly, they could be off by 1,000 people or so, and we're never going to know.
Right, because you could either, I mean, ideally what you want to know is how many actual individual people went.
Yeah.
But if you do turnstile counting, that's how many people came through the door.
Right, which could be multiple times a day for one person, potentially.
Yeah, so if I go to the convention, I go out for lunch, I come back, I'm 2 people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's
or if you go Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you're 3 people. So
yeah. And ultimately, like you said, the convention organizers are going to be saying, oh, so when Origins started, Avalon Hill, is it fair to say Avalon Hill was a bigger force than TSR at that point?
I'd say so in 75, although I'd say that was swiftly changing.
Yeah, but it was enough so that when they started Origins, that wait, am I right? They're calling Avalon Hill the people start Origins.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know because I get confused with Gamma and everything else. Actually, let me back up to the bigger story because I'm not trying to read the book to people.
Right.
What I think is interesting is that during these early years, when you're looking at TSR ends up running Gen Con, which wasn't the fact at the beginning, but we'll keep it simple. Read the book to understand how that happened. And then Avalon Hill, who's a little bit bigger, comes in and they start Origins, and all of a sudden there's a little bit of bad blood and who's going to go where. Throughout those early years, you see a constant drama happening. There's always, we talk about the gaming industry being people who we're all in it together and rising tide lifts all boats. Right. But they were so petty.
Yeah, they really were.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I don't want to give too much away because I go into this in some detail in the book, but there was, I mean, the whole reason Gamma got started was kind of out of pettiness on more TSR side, I'd say, than Gamma's.
Yeah.
But then, like, kind of, you can argue about Origins getting started as just kind of a pissing contest between Avalon Hill and TSR over Gen Con at the time.
God.
I mean, so it's kind of like, yeah, there was a lot of that going on back in the day, and some of it persisted. I mean, like, I think you alluded to it earlier, Jason, what kind of happens with Wizards of the Coast in the 90s, before Magic. So,
I mean, sorry if I'm giving anything away here, but just this one thing really stood out to me. Like, so once Traveler came out and they go to Origins, and TSR is like, well, you can't have any more GDW in our retail store, and we're just not going to talk to you anymore because you went to their convention instead of our convention.
Oh my God.
It's filled with that. It's amazing. So much of it. So the book goes through and it does a great job of following Gen Con as it grows and as it changes, and it tries different things, sometimes on a college campus, sometimes at a Playboy club. Which admittedly, maybe not the best place to go if you want people to bring their 12-year-olds.
Yeah.
You're like, Mom, can I go to a game convention? Sure. Where is it? Never mind.
Right. And let me ask you, so during this game convention at the Playboy Mansion, were there like Playboy models walking around?
Well,
Like,
yeah, all the like servers and stuff for Playboy bunnies.
oh
So,
my God. That's awesome. I mean, it's awesome in the most like ridiculous way, but that's funny.
I don't know if 7 or 8-year-old Luke Gygax was actually at the Playboy Club with his dad for that stuff. We know Ernie was.
yeah.
Right.
You know, but as we all know, to this day, Gary Con is still held at the Playboy Club, which is now the Lake Geneva Resort or something like that.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, I forget exactly, but yeah, it's amazing to see the way that it changed over the years, and so being held on college campuses and in classrooms, and sometimes at a hall. Eventually, it makes its way to Milwaukee. Brian in the chat says there were a lot of sweaty dice.
Right. What I think is interesting, though, is something that I didn't pick up on until a couple of years ago, going just all the different conventions to go to, was that there is this like sort of like pressure for success. So like if you succeed, if your convention is very successful, it can actually create a lot of problems for you. Like you become literally become a victim of your own success, because they're talking about, well, are we going to have enough people to move to this new location? Because if there's too many, we can't be at this location, but will we have enough to go to that location? And if we go to that location, predicting there's going to be that many people, is that going to be a financial burden? I imagine it's got to get really tricky for these organizers.
Yeah, it seemed difficult. I mean, that was one of the problems when the first few years they moved to Milwaukee. Right. It's like they constantly made it look like they were growing every single year. But if you look at the numbers, they were kind of, I mean, struggle is probably too strong of a word, but like growth wasn't happening very well. And they needed to really justify kind of going to a, proper convention center in a, more or less major city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have these themes that kind of play out throughout the history of it. One of them is the pettiness and people fighting against each other, and then the other one is just outside perceptions. So we all know about the Satanic Panic that happened, but that continues. There's always moralizing that happens around it, and so even you would think today, you look at what now that Gen Con is in Indianapolis, it's one of the biggest financial drivers for them. It's a huge thing. And Milwaukee just sort of pissed it away. They were like, well, I don't know about these gamers.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of did. Although one thing I go in the book, there's a myth that I hear a lot about Gen Con these days about how welcoming Indianapolis has always been to Gen Con and to gamers. And I mean, some of my research has shown that that's not exactly true.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's in the book. I don't know if it was the part that you sped read through.
I probably did speed read through it.
Yeah, but there's part of it. There's some story. There was one particularly heinous article written by a journalist that like really painted Gen Con attendees in a horrible light.
Ooh, I did miss that out.
Yeah, that's in there. So there's I mean, I'm not saying Indianapolis doesn't welcome Gen Con, but it's kind of the same as Milwaukee. The businesses loved gamers because of the money they spent.
Yep.
But the locals, I don't know. Did they really accept these gamers or not? And I'm not 100% sure if that's even been true in Indianapolis, at least in the early days.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's a constant theme, because if you go to the 80s or the 90s, people were worried about gamers because they were too, I don't know, they were outsiders. I guess that's the best way to say it. They were outsiders because they were, I don't know, not Satanic Panic even necessarily, just they were just weird, right? Mm-hmm. For whatever they were doing. Like they're dressed up as monsters. And now, we've seen a shift. So gamers today are sometimes seen as, well, at least by Indiana standards, they're weird because, they're all coming in with pink hair and I don't know who the women are and who the boys are and blah, blah, blah. Right. It's a different kind of moral panic, but it's still another one. It's still a moral panic around it. There's still people who are just like, I just don't want weirdos coming into my town for whatever reason it is. But over time, again, we don't have to go into the whole history of everything that happened with Gen Con, but we know. So it starts out, Gary Gygax is a very important, he's either the founder or the most important trigger for this all to happen, however you want to put it. Eventually, we know the story of Gary getting ousted from TSR. If you don't know it, there's plenty of books that can talk about it. And yet he still is sort of a figure throughout all of this, because even when TSR fails and Wizards takes over, and for a while Wizards owns Gen Con, and then eventually Peter Atkinson himself does, Gary and even Dave Arneson still continue to be figures at this convention, very lauded figures. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was mostly had to do with their branding around Dungeons and Dragons, mostly because they would get brought out whenever there was a new edition or whatever, both of them anyway. And I will also want to point out that like the year Gary Gygax died, there was like a memorial and there was like a moment of silence and all this stuff for Gygax. They didn't have any of that for Arneson. So
that's sad.
Yeah. So, it kind of depends a little bit. I mean, like I said, Gygax, you can argue, is the founder or most important person to the creation of the convention. Like, I'd agree with that. But, Arneson's tie to it really was as much as D&D was. And once Gen Con got sold to Atkinson, the tie to D&D in some ways was severed. I mean, Wizards of the Coast was still a major player at Gen Con. They were kind of an anchor exhibitor there. But like Gen Con LLC, as the company is now known, was not directly tied to any of that.
But I mean, there's been at least 1 year, I don't know if there was more, but at least 1 year where Wizards didn't participate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I do. Yeah, that's right. I do remember that. Wizards decided they weren't going to participate in it.
Yeah, I forget the exact year, but around 20... was it 20? No, it was earlier than that.
It was earlier, yeah.
Yeah, I forget the year. I can't remember if it was before or after 5th edition came out. I mean, saying they don't participate isn't exactly true because they still run their organized play programs through like Baldwin Games and stuff like that.
But they didn't have like their big presence, their big whatever.
Yeah, that disappeared like around 2015. I don't remember the exact year, but yeah, that's been gone for a while now. I mean, they're kind of making little steps back. Like they made some good headway coming back last year for D&D's 50th.
Yeah.
But we'll see if they continue that or if that was just a one and done thing for last year.
Because you were saying in the book, I mean, like early on, they had like a castle in there, like a multi-floor.
And again, you have photos of all of that, so people should buy the book and see these.
Yeah.
If you weren't there, I mean, it's gone through so many permutations. They've tried video. They've had video games get big and then not big. Collectible card games have come in. So many shifts have changed.
Hey, do we want to I know we got to wrap up soon because we're like an hour and a half in, but we want to go through these pictures real quick?
Sure. I did. Well, we don't have to go. We'll flip through them really quickly.
Okay.
The things I sent over to you.
All right.
So we've got Major Wesley with his.
Go back to this one. Gen Con 1969. Look at that.
Who do we have in this photo here?
Yeah. So the Gary Gygax is sitting there front and center.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, I don't remember off the other.
I think isn't that Dave Arneson behind him with the glasses?
I don't think so. It does look a little bit like him, but I don't think it actually is.
This is a kind of a pixelated photo, so we're not sure. They're playing some. Well, I sent it to you. It's a low res photo.
But I don't. If I remember correctly, I don't think Arneson was actually at Gen Con quite this early. I don't remember exactly what his first year was. I'm pretty sure it's in the book, but yeah.
But they met face to face for the first time at a Gen Con.
Right. Correct.
Yeah.
All right.
So here we have the beginning. This looks like Horticultural Hall to me. Because I recognize the door back there, actually.
Yeah. But it is super early.
It starts out, just a few nerds sitting around a table, and then I think you have the next one here of like Gen Con, what it looks like. Well, these are the logos.
Yeah, these are different logos.
The reason I brought this up was because it was just interesting to me. All the things you kind of call out here that I didn't know. I'm not going to say who designed that first Gen Con logo because I think it's a fun little surprise in the book. Mm-hmm. But I think that was the best one. I think they nailed it on the first time. And I'm gonna call. I know that person still, so I'm gonna call him up and give him a little praise for that. but yeah, all the Gen Con logos over the years.
Okay, and then there's the machine.
Yeah, yeah.
And then is this science fiction? Is this the science fiction Saturday?
No,
No.
that is.
What is this?
I'll
That is
let Matt say.
Yeah, that is the bar back of the Safe House in Milwaukee. So that was it still exists. You can still go. I was just there to take some pictures actually this last December. But it is a 1960s spy themed bar that has like secret doors and all sorts of little hidden like treasures and things in there. But it was very, I mean, it's a nerdy place. Gen Con attendees latched onto it as soon as they figured out where it was, because it's kind of weird to get into the place because you have to go through, if I remember correctly, the outside door says it's like a laundry company, and you have to basically just know it's there to get in.
Wow.
Because it's not clear that it's a restaurant unless you know it's already there.
Okay.
Yeah. I think what I like about this is it kind of calls out a little bit of what was lost by going to Indianapolis, because Milwaukee had all these cool places for the gamers to go. And honestly, Indianapolis, when you leave Gen Con, it's kind of lame. I'm just going to be honest. It's just a few chain restaurants and not much there.
It was better pre-pandemic, but so many places closed the pandemic and have not come back. It's really a lot tougher there now for sure when you leave the convention center.
Yeah.
Okay. What are we looking at here?
I just love this. I found this online. Somebody was running a miniatures game where they recreated the horticultural hall in miniature, and they were playing a game where you would go to Gen Con 3 and be at the horticultural hall.
So that's how small horticultural hall was, like relatively.
Yeah, it's a little bigger than that, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's pretty tight. It's a pretty small thing.
Okay.
It's good for a wedding, basically.
Gotcha. All right. And then this is kind of today-ish, right?
And that's what you get today.
Yeah.
Yep.
I sent you a few of them just to show exactly how big this gets. You can kind of flip through those.
Oh, wait. Sorry.
All right. So
actually, that's all I have.
But yeah, so let's wrap up with a little bit about the cultural impact of all of this. So The Big Bang Theory, definitely one of the most popular sitcoms. I don't know of all time, but certainly recently. I don't like it, but I like the fact that it gives you this cultural impact, and you mention it in the book a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Big Bang Theory was one of many of the cultural phenomenons that happened that kind of allowed, I'll just call it, the gaming nerddom to be more accepted in broader society with people who did not play the game.
Yeah. And there was this amazing moment. I forget which year it was, but there was a episode where Sheldon, the main character, the point of the show is he's trying to get a ride to GaryCon. Yeah. So GaryCon, Gary Gygax passed in 2008. The next year was a convention held in his honor, which was GaryCon 1, and it's grown to whatever number we're up to now. I can't do math, but it's held at the Playboy Club, and had an episode where he didn't want to go to Gen Con. He wanted to go to GaryCon. And so now at GaryCon, there's a Sheldon stand-up with him wearing his GaryCon t-shirt, and you'll see it there every year. And it's just a fun little view of what a cultural impact all of this gaming has had.
They had to have had a writer who was like, goes to GaryCon and was into that sort of thing, because there's no other way they would have known.
Who knows? I mean, it honestly was still a little obscure at that point. But yeah, we've reached a point where the conventions themselves have become cultural statements. And we'll skip the other picture we have there. I was going to talk about, some of the moral panic and stuff like that, but it's a silly picture.
I think it's all the pictures I have. That's
fine. But to kind of wrap this up, I mean, I'd like to hear you talk, Matt, about what all this means to you, because we've seen what Dungeons and Dragons has done culturally to everything. I don't even need to make a list of that. But then you have this other side, which is the people actually coming together. And you had some numbers about how many conventions exist at this point and what happens around the world. How do you think this, well, I mean, how do you think, what do you think this kind of means about the world that we live in 2025 versus the world in 1966 before they had a convention?
Yeah, I mean, I think I talk a little bit about this in the book, or at least I allude to it. I don't remember if I have deep discussion on it, but I think a lot of this is a symptom of the state of the world, because part of what we found is that the worst things are when there's terrible things going on in the world, people want to come together and have fun-filled, comfortable activities that they can do together. And things like board games, role-playing games fit very much in that mold. So I think as the world, it's kind of sad to put it this way, but when the world is stressful, when it's scary, when there's bad things happening, people want to be comforted and they want to come together. And gaming conventions is one way they can do that. And I mean, there's numerous reasons why gaming conventions and like Gen Con have exploded in popularity, along with the whole just rise of gaming in general in the past 15 years or so that's happened. But I think the thing that keeps it sustaining is just the fact that it's just scary stuff going on out there. I mean, every time something happened, when 9/11 happened, when the economy crashed in 2008, when the pandemic happened, gaming got a boost. It came up. People wanted to come together and play more, and they want to come together to do that now.
Yeah, and I think conventions, one of the really good thing about conventions is a lot of people who are like really hardcore gamers and such, and would take a chunk of their check and go to a convention, right? They're generally, I'm being very general here, they're generally not the people who like to go out and bar hop and stuff. It's generally just it's not that crowd usually. But here they can do that, and the people in the bar are going to be people just like them, right? And you also find that more or less gamers are generally more accepting and open and friendly, especially with other gamers, like people like themselves. You're going to see your people. So I think it's a great place for people to hang out who are not generally like, I don't really want to go to this bro bar and hang out with a bunch of people who are not anything like me. And I can't just talk about whatever I want to talk about. Whereas if you go to a gaming convention, you go hang out at the bar, you're going to hang out and you're going to talk with people who are like you and talk about the same things you talk about. So I think that is a really big benefit to, that group of folks.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because it's, especially if you want to do that in person with someone and not just be perpetually online, like that's the way to do that for sure. Because I mean, the interactions you have in person are so much different than online. I mean, there's so much. I interviewed roughly 40 people for this book. I don't remember exactly how many, but there's, the things they told me about their experiences at these conventions and how friendly and welcoming people generally felt. I mean, there's some conflict in there, and I talk about some of it in the book for sure. But their experiences in person versus online are just 1,000% different.
Oh yeah.
And I really felt that, like I said, when I'm so grateful to the fact that I was able to be there at the 50th anniversary at the Horticultural Hall and see people who had first gamed together at a convention. They hadn't met before they went to that first Gen Con. And the way that their eyes lit up when they saw each other, and that they just stepped into a time machine and they were teenagers again. And that there was this bond between people, because people who maybe only saw each other once a year at a convention, but that bond is permanent. Yeah. So when will this book be available? You said you don't have a date yet?
I don't have a hard date, but it's most likely going to be either late August or sometime in September.
Okay. Great. Well, we'll make sure that we let people know when they can buy one. And like I said, I think you've created something here that is going to be cited endlessly, and that it's an absolutely fun read. Can't wait to sit down with a physical book and read through it all again. And excited for other people to get a chance to do the same thing.
Yeah, good. Glad to hear it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Matt, for coming on with us tonight, and to everybody who sat through a particularly long episode. It could have
went really deep on this longer, one,
but then I would have given away the whole book.
Right.
So please, if you are listening on the audio podcast, go to iTunes, give us a review and a thumbs up if you would. And if you are on YouTube, a like and subscribe helps immensely. if you are a Patreon subscriber at anything other than the free level, you can join us in about 5 or 10 minutes. We'll be over in the Discord where we'll be talking a bunch of crap. And that's where we usually are. So we will see you all next week. Thank you, Matt, for being with us. And
Thanks,
thank
Matt.
you, everybody, for listening.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Good night.